Okay, we'll call the meeting to order. First order of business is the approval of the minutes from the December 20th meeting.
Move to approve minutes. Second.
Moved to approve the minutes, been seconded. Any discussion, any corrections, additions? Seeing none. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion passed. I should call the order first. Is anyone on the phone?
You're on mute. It's whether or not they hear you.
Okay.
Unmute here.
Now
Do we have anyone on the phone? All right, then we have Senator Blair, Jeff, Joe Perry, myself here. Before we start, there was some question last time on how this subcommittee was formed. And I saw in the social media, and I just wanted to clear that up for people. This subcommittee came about at the full task force meeting when the recommendation was made to look at the 80-20, say no less than 80-20 for the state, no more than 20% for the employee. They decided to form a subcommittee and ask for those who wanted to serve on it. And the six of us are the ones who volunteered to serve on the subcommittee. Anyone from the task force could have volunteered to serve on that subcommittee. They had the right to do that, but I mean, we were the six that said we would serve, and that's how this came about. I guess since I made the motion for the 80-20 is why they asked me to chair the subcommittee. But I want the people who will listen and watch this to know that all 29 members of the task force had the opportunity to serve on this subcommittee had they so chosen.
Were there, can you go back to, you started that about the comments, was there criticism of this group not being big enough for the makeup or what?
The makeup. There's some criticism on the makeup, and I just wanted it to be clear that
Volunteers.
that everyone had the opportunity to do that.
And we did this on the fly, for that
Yeah.
matter.
We did.
Information came forward. I have to commend the chair and everything of the full committee for being conducive to allowing us to get forward with that.
Oh, I do too, but I wanted to make that clear, Chairman Hall. I wanted to make it clear that that's how that came about, just so people know. All right, at the last time we had asked Director Cheatham for some information. Are you ready to give us some pros and cons of the calendar year?
I did send it out.
Right.
Do you have a copy?
Yes.
Yes, we do, but are there anything in particular you want to bring out from this?
Mr. Chair, can I ask
Yes.
something or make a comment?
Yes.
It's my understanding that you've done this before, so when you're giving us comments and all, tell us about what happened in the times before that you've done and how those, weave that in to whatever conversation you have with us on that, so that we get the historical background of what's taken place in the past.
Yeah, so I included in your packet the 1999 PEI board minutes, when PEI moved from calendar year to fiscal year, with the rationale for why they moved. So that you can have that as big. I was not here at that time. My staff has told me that some of the issues that are trying to be resolved here may not indeed be resolved, and they had similar problems back in earlier times where, I mean, the real issue here is, no matter what you do, as long as the politics and the advocacy around the legislature during the legislative time period, if it changes what the PEIA board and the PEIA plan is put together and taken to public hearings, we're going to have a huge problem. That's really the issue, and that's what happened, has happened in the last couple of years. That as the legislative session has come in, there's been discussions on changing the budget guidance we received, or changing the benefit structure received, or, again, bad information on some of the plans that were put into place that have caused changes at the last minute. And although it may be beneficial to get through the legislative session with a full budget and go into that next January, understand in that January where the plan goes live, not only has the legislature got to deal with what you've done 12 months ago, but you've also got to deal with the new plan that's going to be proposed for a year later. And so the legislature has the potential to take the current plan being impacted by whatever's happening a year later. And you have to deal with both of them at once. Does that make sense? We're also going to go out to public hearings in November for 15 months later, and we're going to say to them, as I said in there, say, hey, guess what? First off, let me tell you what we did to you 9 months ago or 6 months ago. It's going to happen in January. And now let me tell you what's going to happen in 18 months or 15 months. It's going to happen to you a year from now. So the issue is the potential uncertainty of something happening during the legislative session of the pass a plan. And I don't know changing from fiscal year to calendar year solves that problem. That's what I'm trying to say. And in the past, people have told me that indeed the plan has gone live in January, legislature's come in session, and said, oh, no, 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 even though it's been vetted for a year. So that's all I'm saying. So that's why I said when I said to you, we can do either one. Both are fraught with the same issue.
Discussion.
What kind of impact did it have with the county boards? Because county boards of education run fiscal years that match what you're doing right now. What kind of bearing would that have? Because I've already had one county board of education let me know that they're opposed to this.
Yeah, so understand that teacher contracts, most employment contracts, university contracts run 7/1. They begin on 7/1 fiscal year. So in theory, you can get a rate increase and a benefit change in the middle of your contract year, which would indeed affect your rate of compensation that was unplanned for.
Other questions, discussion?
I don't have any questions, but I just looked briefly through the pros and cons. And it looks like, according, I guess your staff developed this, but there's 5 pros, and I lost count here, the negatives, it's over 15.
Yeah, so.
Is there a way to summarize? I mean, I'll go through all these, but is there anything?
Well, in all fairness, I don't know that there, none of the cons are insurmountable, as I said before. I'm just giving you some of the issues, and they're not weighted. You know, again, on the pro side, some of the pros, as Perry's true desire, that pro is a pretty strong pro that we can attempt to get through the legislative session and get a budget that everybody believes in. And as long as that legislature and the governor can hold that line the next year when it goes into effect, it solves the problem that Perry's trying to address. That is a pretty positive pro. But
The
again,
reality is you have a legislature that comes back in the following January and can make changes.
absolutely, and that's the other thing. You know, in the gubernatorial election year, you have an interesting issue. Not only does it delay the whole legislative session, but it changes the power structure. It could change the power of the composition of the legislature as well. So there could be changes to the budget or at that point.
Well, number 5 here says legislative approved pay increases occurred July 1 with the current salary-based tier structures that could affect premiums, deductibles, and out-of-pockets in mid-year.
Correct. Everything at the state is running on a fiscal year. Is why the reason the finance board went back to that structure to align things.
So you had cost of transition with participants in this use. What, did you run any figures on cost of making a change?
So that's back to the, I'm sorry, it's back to the political issue here, right? I mean, our intention probably would be to run a 6-month split year, a 6-month plan year, and then a 12-month plan year. The other option is an 18-month plan year. So depending on what we do to deductibles and out-of-pockets, the the constituents can feel like, hey, you know, I've got to meet my deductible twice this time in the next 12 months. That's not fair to me, out of my pocket. And also, the other thing, in the 6 month year, if they hit the deductible, they're going to need everything done before the deductible starts again, and the cheap deductible year. I think both the plan and the member could take a hit. It all depends on how we structure it, but it's going to be noisy either way. In an 18-month plan year, typically we will lose. If we go deductible and a half, people don't like that. If we just keep the deductibles and co-insurance where they are, we'll lose in an 18-month cycle, because we'll have 6 months extra over the above. So I mean, it depends on how we structure it. Right? There's not, until we can make that decision. Right. My recommendation, if you want to go with a 6 month plan year, we have deductibles.
Any other discussion?
Just to be clear, my real interest in going to a calendar year was, one, it brings it in conformity with almost all the open enrollment periods. And two, it gives the staff at PEIA, which is a very small staff, time to really educate the beneficiaries about the changes being made and helping them make better selections. Particularly in a year following a gubernatorial election, the legislature doesn't get out until mid-April at best. Ted doesn't know, Mr. Cheatham doesn't know exactly what the budget is going to be for that time. He has some preliminary data from the governor in the fall, but doesn't have any final budget until mid-April, and you have an open enrollment period that's going on at that time, and the plan year begins July 1st. It's a real crunch time, but it's, you know, it really was to alleviate some of that stress on the staff and give beneficiaries better information. But if, you know, if the staff at PEIA wants to keep it as a calendar year, that's fine with me. The members really to provide them.
I think that goal would be accomplished under the one. That goal would be accomplished. The bigger fiscal goal and the other issues would not be. But I mean, I mean, even the federal government only runs on a fiscal year, right? Everything on a fiscal year, the benefits and everything. So it's going to make sense. The key is, in a perfect world, if you're asking what would be perfect, that would be that we get our budget guidance, we follow the cycle we're following, and there's something in the legislature that says, this is what we're doing for our benefit package for our employees, budget that validates that by January 31st so we can move forward. I mean, that's really would be perfect. That's really the issue.
Yes.
Ted, I guess I'm back to the comment that you made early on that said you were on a calendar year and then you went to fiscal year, and now we have a proposal to go back to calendar. I'm trying to balance the two because I don't know the historical perspective, but
yeah, so again, Joe, before my time, but I mean, my staff is saying there was a lot of reasons to go to fiscal year, to align us with salaries, the budgeting, the financial accounting, to align us with fiscal year. And the legislative issue that again, I understand the sensitivity that everybody over there is elected, the governor's elected, and they do have priorities to take care of the citizens of West Virginia. I got that. That's the issue I was concerned about happening on the budget fluctuation. Right? That's it. It's what happens during that session that may impact our ability to do what we need to do. And Perry's absolutely right, and especially in the gubernatorial election year. The legislature doesn't get out until April 18th. We've already started open enrollment. Books are already published. The legislature hasn't even left yet, and potentially hasn't agreed to the budget that we're working on yet. And that presents another problem.
There's some statutory requirements you haven't met in those years,
right.
too. Is that
Right.
correct?
One year we did, this is deadline about a week. Yeah.
I'm going to say something about that gubernatorial year. We need to be able to fix that, because when we changed the Constitution that allowed to have 2 terms, they didn't go in and make it so that if you're re-elected, you shouldn't be pushed out a month. That's a bane to the legislature as well. And we need to, I'll get ready to get that introduced as a resolution this year and get that taken care of, because nobody likes it being shifted out, and we're just delayed for no reason for a year. And this is a good selling point for where things like this can actually, can't fix it all the time. But there, you have the potential for somebody to be reelected to solve it at least in that time period.
Any other discussion?
Yeah, well, I've got a little bit more on it. I'm a little bit, I like the idea on it, and then the more I become aware of it, I'm starting to get concerned with everything else that's taking place. If I'm on the recipient side, and I've not been there for PEIA, but other ones, when there's all kinds of change taking place, and you never know for sure what's going on, and we add this into it, and it takes it from a small spin to a lot faster tornado, so to speak. People can't understand, the recipients won't be able to follow what's going on, and it might add to the frustration of it. You tell me if I'm wrong. I'm assuming that may be what would happen.
We'll go into a calendar year, we'll give recipients a lot more time to make a decision and allow PEI staff to get out and do public education with the beneficiaries before they make their decision. Right now, it's very rushed in the spring, very rushed, even in non-elections and in years not following the gubernatorial election, it's still rushed.
Okay, but whatever, and I get that. So if we wanted to implement this, wouldn't it be better for us to get the rest of our work done on PEIA and implement this 2 or 3 years out from now, rather than when we're going through doing all the different things that's taking place right now?
I don't know if it doesn't have the support of the PEIA staff that we ought to proceed with. Well, I just keep it the way it is. It was really to benefit them more than the beneficiaries. It would give them better time, but it was really to benefit the staff, so they wouldn't be so hard pressed to get things going in July 1. We could have much easier time getting things started January 1st. But if they don't want that relief, fine with me.
Ted, what I heard you say was that one of the real solutions to a problem would be if you knew by January 31st what the budget would be, what you would actually come. And that would be a statutory change, because they don't really have to come up with the budget until
Correct.
the end of the session, and a lot of times it's a week after the end of the regular session before you come up with the budget. So at least in my mind, one of the things that we could look at is a statutory change that would require the legislature to at least give a budget for PEIA by even February 1st, if you want to say it that way. Is that more of a issue than the fiscal year versus the calendar year?
Yes, that would keep things in line better. I believe, if you look at the success, this has been a recent issue for me. When I first got here, typically the guidance we were given by the governor was built into that overall budget, and that budget, I would say, the first many years I was here, was adopted, at least as related to PEIA on that structure. Because again, that's the budget and the plan that's taken out to everybody for comments and to be adapted. So, that plan, so that would help. That would be nice. Getting the budget guidance, planning, getting the comments, and then taking that to the legislature, like you do January 1st, and having the legislature say, yes, go with this plan. And we're behind you 100%, and we're not going to change it, blah, blah, would be perfect.
There's no way we can lock in the legislature.
We can, but we can't lock them in, but we can make the recommendation. that the legislature look at that.
I just called Michael Cook, who understands this probably better than anybody in the building. He's on his way down, so that we can find out whether that is doable. I can't answer that question
That's
myself.
perfect.
And so he's on his way down so that we can find out whether this works or not.
That's perfect. Any other discussion on this while we're waiting on Michael?
I expect him to be here within 5 minutes.
Okay.
Sorry about that, I thought it was.
Yeah.
In the interim, I'd like to make a motion that we recommend 3 changes to the 80-20 rule. Those 3 changes would be that to be at least 80% shared by the employer and no more than 20% shared by the employee. This provides the legislature some flexibility, so if they, years like this year, where they want to go to 100%, if they contribute money under the current 80-20 rule, and they have to find some way around not triggering an automatic increase in premiums to the employees, which is not their intent. So it gives the legislature some flexibility and employees some protection against an automatic premium increase. The second component would be allow the PEI Finance Board to make up the employees 20% with not just premiums, but deductibles, co-pays, and co-insurances. So it gives that finance board that flexibility. And I've said this before, I mean, there's with an increase in premiums, you spread the cost out among everybody. With increases in cost, deductibles or co-pays, co-insurances, it targets those who utilize the system the most. I think having a combination of those two would make most sense in most years, but it would leave to the finance board the ability to make that kind of decision.
You're losing me on that one about the 80-20, and no matter what happens, it's never going to be 20%, but how do you control?
That's not what I said.
Well, that's why I'm asking you the question for
That's not what I
clarity.
said. I said it would be no more than 20%. So it could be 20%. It would be at least 80% by the legislature, and they...
I understand that, but you said as a person uses the system, they can have more.
No, the finance board could make up the 20% by increases not just in premiums, but it could be a combination of premiums and cost sharing, whether that's co-pays.
Oh, make up the difference to get
up to the 20%.
I just don't understand how it works.
Well, I think what he's saying is increasing co-pays, co-insurance to offset the premiums to bring that cost down. Right. So, I mean, when you look at the plans effectively right now compared to the commercial market, all the limits are a lot lower. I mean, they are a lot lower. I would add in there leniency to incorporate incentives for wellness as well.
I concur with that.
Yeah.
And then third and most important would be that we change what we base the 80-20% on. Right now, it's based on the total premiums. So you look at the total premiums, you say 80% is paid by the legislature and the governor, 20% by employees. This would freeze, my recommendation would be freeze the existing cost-sharing arrangements that are in place, and then base the 80-20 on the growth in the PEIA in future years. So that the legislature would be responsible for at least 80% of the growth, and employees would be responsible for up to 20% of the growth of PEIA. This is what gets to, in my mind, fixing PEIA really means. It gives the employees a stable, secure health insurance program. It says we're going to limit your exposure in the future. I think if understood by employees, this would be one of the most important things that we could do to make sure that people stay in the classroom and we could get the work done in schools and in state governments. But I think that package of changes, the 80-20 rule, will go a long ways towards achieving that goal.
So it's moved, is there a second?
I'd like to see some of this in writing rather than a 30-second summary. We'll make
Well,
a frame motion.
I have it embodied in with that. I thought the staff of PEIA wanted to change the calendar year, so it's embedded in this, because I thought the two proposals would go together.
You have an extra?
Yeah, sure.
Here.
I have one for the rest.
So the idea was it was changing the calendar at the same time that these three changes to the 80-20 rule were. So in bullet point number 4, at least 80% of the growth in PEIA expenditures would be budgeted with general and special revenues. That's really the heart of what I want to do. The other two items were to provide flexibility, first to the legislature by saying at least 80% and no more than 20%. So if you want to go to 100%, you don't trigger an automatic increase in premiums. You don't have to go to above 80%, but if you do decide that, it's not going to trigger that.
And I'm supportive of that.
Okay.
The only thing that I would like a little bit of flexibility is to have the discussion that we had last time, the bankability.
I incorporated that into number 4. It says, provided that if the legislature has provided more than 80% of the growth in PEI expenditures during the previous year, their share of the growth in PEI expenditures for the next year plan may be reduced by the percentage above 80% that you had approved, but it can't be lower than 70%. I mean, what I was really wanted to avoid was, 2 years in a row, you provide 100%, and the third year you say, we're only going to provide 40%. I thought that went too far. But I like your idea of smoothing or banking some of the additional.
It allows a little bit of flexibility for the legislature.
That is my
With the taxpayer, however you want to.
That's my.
Yeah, great. I'm glad that part of it's there.
I thought it was an excellent suggestion and I incorporated it into
So we have a motion on the floor. Is there a second?
Is that motion written out?
That's what I'm looking for, because now we're going to take this to the full task force.
Okay.
and
We need to
Somebody's
write
got
it
to give a verbal report, and it's just going to be.
We're having a hard time writing it. So
Yeah, I need to see it right before I'm.
Yeah.
All right, then, let's do this. Let's take a brief break while we're waiting on Mike to get down here. And give us time to, you can work with them to write this out. Do it. Take a brief 10-minute recess. And we'll reconvene the meeting.
Okay.
If you want to start us back. And we have an answer on the fiscal requirement of February 1st, so.
It's my understanding that we can actually do it, statutory. Mike and I met with Michael outside here a few minutes ago, and if you want to elaborate on
Well, I'll
this.
just say, the budget is forced, it was until the constitutional amendment passed this year, to take a number from the Supreme Court. And you knew that that was frozen right there. No change in it.
Right.
So in theory, you could put in the statute a requirement that the PIA number be fixed by date certain. And obviously, it would be a statute that the legislature could then change later if they didn't like it. But you could put that in the law and say, and everybody could understand the rules, that the PIA funding discussion would occur by a certain date, and that would be in the budget, and it wouldn't be changed. You could theoretically do that. And then that way, the deadline for that would be known by everybody, and obviously you'd be battling it out. The question is, what date do you do that? And in the gubernatorial years, if you're setting February 1st, if I were doing it, this is kind of a hybrid. In the gubernatorial year, I would push it to March the 1st. You know, and then that way you're into the session a few days, but you're getting that number fixed. Now, the PIA spend, as you all know, is not a number you just look in the budget and find.
Right.
It's in all the different personnel lines everywhere, and it's in special revenue, general revenue. But that number is a percentage of all those things. So that's not mechanically really that hard to do. But it's not like if somebody said, okay, we're putting X millions of dollars in, you're gonna find that line in the budget. It's gonna be spread across the budget.
Let me ask you this, would it make sense if we, rather than say February 1st and March 1st, if we just said 3 weeks after the state of the state?
Yeah, I mean, you
Because
could
that-
set a date, so many days after.
Yeah, because that takes care of the gubernatorial
Yeah, state of
issue.
states
Yeah,
also.
the state
Yeah,
of states.
it reaches the same goal.
Yeah.
You set a date somewhere early in the session, but enough to
2 weeks.
accommodate PIA. That way they live with the fact that their number is given to them and they can proceed with all the machinery of what you do to get to the fiscal year.
All right.
That, I think that would require, that somebody have to write that bill and,
Yeah, and I'll try and get that bill ready.
What we're doing though is making a recommendation to the full task force to make a recommendation to the legislature that the PEI funding line item would be locked in 2 weeks after the state of the state. Does that make sense?
yeah.
Right.
Well, let's get this right here so that we're trying to encourage this.
Right.
Because we may actually see something up, because when Mike brought this up, all these other lines in the budget of where it comes in at, that may be something that is less than surmountable I know you were saying that, I didn't have that discussion with Michael out there.
Well, we've done it before. Remember, there was a year under Tomlin when he put a $39 million PIA funding line in the introduced budget. Then it disappeared in the final budget. Well, it didn't disappear. It just got spread across all the other lines. And mechanically, the budget guys know how to do that. I mean, it's not something that will scare them. They can do that.
Okay, well, that'll come out. Because
Yeah, well, I'm sure when you vet the bill,
When we got the bill,
But-
that'll be getting, that's what I'm getting at.
Yeah, you can recommend that
If
some process of solidifying the PIA spend be accomplished early in the session in a timely manner for
Right.
all the stated reasons.
Yeah, and I like the idea.
Yeah, and then the mechanics, all the nuances, as you know, in legislation like that will surface, but your budget guys will tell you that they can do it. Because I remember that line stuck out like, it was there. I mean, everybody who was looking at the PIA spend that year saw that number and introduced budget. It did show up, it was spent, but it wasn't a line. Because you gotta put it where it goes, in the personnel lines of the different
Right, and
agencies.
I understand that aspect.
Use the word encourage and I'll feel comfortable, to encourage the legislature to do, because I'm willing to go and take this on and try to make this happen. Whether the full task force approves it or not, I see this as being a
How
good.
about
idea.
adequately encourage?
Mhm.
How about adequately encourage?
That'll work. That doesn't bother me, but something, how many times we see stuff pop up out of nowhere that we didn't see
Right.
on that, and so that's my
You
line.
say recommend they pursue.
Yeah, there you
All
go.
right, so Perry, since this was your original idea,
My wife doesn't, I
All right.
recommend that you pursue.
are you okay with the
No, I think that'd be, it doesn't get to the point of giving beneficiaries more time to think about it, but it does provide some relief to the PEIA staff, which I think is important.
so let me make sure I have this right. The motion is going to,
Could you increase the fonts? It's
Yeah.
a lot of
Yeah.
fonts, you should take it.
yeah, but I think in the best interest, Perry, is to separate this one and separate this rather than the three motion grouped together. Separate this.
it out.
That's great.
Yeah.
Three different ones.
Yeah. So the first motion then is to encourage the legislature to appropriate funds for PEIA 2 weeks after the state of the state.
Is 2 weeks reasonable, or should be 3? I'm not questioning it.
Well,
just don't want-
when I said
report
3,
back.
Ted's the one that said 2 weeks makes it,
Yeah.
Okay,
Sooner the better.
yeah.
yeah, but you don't do the budgets.
Well, again, going back to the issue that we're getting governor's budget guidance in October 15th.
Yeah,
So we've got a budget guidance to the
And this-
overall budget from the governor and what's going to be proposed to the legislature anyway, come their session. So we've already got this starting place.
Right.
And the whole plan, at that point, submitted January 1st, is built around that budget. So that will tell you what's coming from special revenue, what's coming from general revenue, what's coming from benefit cuts, what's coming from premium increases, so that the legislature can indeed look at that plan as a whole.
You're getting consensus on 2 weeks.
I'm sorry.
so the motion on the floor is to encourage the legislature to appropriate PEIA funds 2 weeks after the state of the state. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, second. Discussion? Seeing none. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion passed. All right, second motion.
She's making a comment right now.
Oh my God.
Well, we've accomplished something already.
It's gonna be helpful.
Yeah.
I can just, they're making copies, I can quickly just go over the
Get
three,
closer to it.
That's not working.
there's 3 proposals. The first is that the legislature shall, share of the 80/20 shall be at least 80%, and the employee's share will be no more than 20%. Again, that gives flexibility. It doesn't require legislature to do anything different than what they have been doing. It gives them flexibility so they can increase the appropriations without triggering an automatic increase in premiums for the employees, which is their intent last year and this year both, for example, so this will give them the flexibility. The second part of it is to allow the 20% to be made up not just with premiums, but with increases in cost sharing, whether that's deductibles or co-pays, and incentives for wellness. So that could be in the mix too. That just gives the finance board some flexibility. There was one year when the legislature stepped in at the last minute to provide money for to keep premiums, keep the cost sharing from going up. And they went from the finance board was considering 100% cost sharing reductions, and they immediately switched with the additional appropriations to 100% premium increases. All this second part of it does is give PEIA finance board flexibility to be able to do a combination of premiums and cost sharing along with incentives for wellness. The third, which is the most important, says we're going to change how we calculate the 80-20 split, and that will not look at total premiums. We're going to freeze the current cost sharing that are in place and say the 80-20 from the future will be based on projected growth in PEIA expenditures. So whatever the growth is going to be, the legislature will pick up at least 80%, and the employees will pick up no more than 20% of those costs. So it does limit the exposure of employees, and that's my intent, so that we provide a stable, secure insurance program to the beneficiaries.
And it does have in it that if the legislature appropriates more than 80% of the growth, it allows that smoothing. But
It does include the smoothing.
So you're saying when you year that they pay 84% and they don't need to recapture that back?
That's exactly.
Okay. Because right now we're at 84%.
Ted, are we at 84% right now spent?
The actuarial value?
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
no.
it's- yeah, that sounds about reasonable.
8416?
Something like
Okay.
that. That's the actuarial value of the plan underneath the premiums. In other words, if you take the premium equation out and you look at the medical cost of spend, with deductibles and co-insurance, is worth about 16% of the cost. The state pay another 84% of the overall healthcare spend. In other words, 16% is the employee's share underneath, outside the premium, just pure medical.
Or you say for future, from here going forward.
Here going forward.
But if you add premium in that, is that, what's the,
So it's two different things, I believe, and I'll check with Dave. I think when we talk about the actuarial value of the plan, we're talking about the cost sharing underneath the plan, how it's split.
because at one point, I know a few years ago, when you look at the total plan with out-of-pocket deductibles and everything else, the employee was paying actually about 23%.
Oh, if you look at, yeah,
If you add premiums and everything in it.
right. I understand.
Right. So I understand what you're saying on the cost side, it's 16%, but when you're looking at the total plan, it,
I understand. Yes, when you look at the total revenue in the
Right.
plan and
Right.
how that's portioned,
right,
I understand, yes.
yeah.
But we're talking about this as a function of
Total premium. Okay, there's motion on the floor, is there a second? Been moved and second. Discussion.
You doing all three of these together?
Yeah.
I'm sure we're doing a second.
Seeing no discussion, all in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion passed.
Thank you for putting it running. I feel better with
Yeah,
the
that's good.
consistency going from us to the.
And if there's,
Mr. Chairman, if there's
yeah,
misspelled
just one
words-
second. Could you also type up the first motion for us for the regular task force meeting about the 2 weeks after the.
You said appropriate, I would say to be appropriate.
That, whatever, anyway you guys make it.
Okay, all right.
Conceptually.
Yeah.
Well,
Yes, sir, Mr.
this is why I was going to ask the chair if we could go back. The finance attorney here, I would like to go back again to that discussion so that he can hear it and begin drafting that legislation.
Okay.
Look, I think that that's a great idea, and I'm willing to sponsor it and get that thing moving. We got him here, let's get it right so that he can hear it and walk away with it and know what to draft accurately. Okay? And Ted, you be involved in this.
Just let me, Ted, if you'll come to the table, just let me write the bill and we'll be good.
That's called trust me.
Yeah, trust me,
I'll be
it'll
going
fine.
to the same therapist you've been going to.
Yeah. Ted, if you want to come up to the table so we make sure we have this right. Now, the governor gives him projections by October 15th, the budget, so to speak. What we're doing is then saying that the legislature, we're strongly recommending the legislature act upon that and appropriate the funds within 2 weeks after the state of the state. And we do it that way rather than say February 1st, because in a gubernatorial year, then
Could
that
I
gives.
comment on that briefly?
Sure.
That would be the following Wednesday. It might be appropriate to just say 16 days from the opening of, from the beginning of the session. And we get the language,
That's perfect with me, too.
and that would mean the Friday, that would be the Friday of the following week.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I would say the recommended appropriation for PEIA, and however that language is in the law, this October 15th language, basically you would say that the October 15th number would be finalized by then.
Yeah.
It could change.
It could change, but
It
whatever
could
the
change.
budget
You
guys.
put the language that it could change, let it reference that, and I can work with Jeff to get that right.
So what you're saying,
Conceptually, you'd look at the law as it is now on its 15th October date, and basically say that that has to be set in stone by the 16 days after the end of the legislature, which would be Friday, a Friday.
Yeah,
and that shall be appropriated or whatever. You got the idea, and I don't know the exact wording, but you can fit it into the current PEIA statute and maybe make it a part of it.
Joe?
I was just going to clarify, Chief, that I think you said the number in October is X, and if that X changed, that would be the number, because you said the number would be finalized by the 16th day. So
Right.
it could be increased from that
It
number.
could be increased.
Yeah, that's what I want to
Could be
clarify.
decreased.
Could be decreased.
Right,
They did
I'm just saying,
just
it's
be
not the
changed.
number from October, it's the,
Right.
a number would be set.
Yeah.
Good.
Somehow you say this is the beginning number, but it'll be absolutely finalized by then. And then Jeff would just have to look at the PEIA statute and you'll find it. That's the concept.
Are we good with that, Joe?
I'm good.
There you go. Far. I was looking forward to writing the bill, but I guess that's out of the question.
Do you want Ted or Mike or whatever to get it drafted as soon as you possibly can? We'll make this into public. And do you need anything else?
I don't.
You are?
This and this is.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other, anything else to come before the subcommittee?
I do have one other thing, and this is a, it's not up for, I just want to pass it out for people's, this is a draft, it's a model piece of legislation from the National Academy for Health, State Health Policy. And it deals with making prescription drugs more transparent and would give the state a lot more information. I'm not an expert in this area. I'm just passing along some information. I think if we have a future meeting, that if we could get somebody, that hopefully come down here, or at least participate by phone from the National Academy for Health, NASHP, it would be, they're the experts in this, and I'm just passing along a model piece of legislation for your information.
Or is this for our committee or maybe one of the other committees?
It would be statutory change, so I think would be for our committee. You kind of have overlapping jurisdiction between your committee, though, it's cost, this would be
Well, that's what I was trying to figure, whether it's that cost implications or whether it's statutory. That's what
it's
I was-
statutory. It doesn't get cost reductions in prescription drugs. What it does is give you information so you can make informed decisions about ways to reduce costs in the future. So it's a first step towards that process. And it'll get you information on the amount of rebates that are being provided by pharmaceutical companies, and they recommend the 340B.
Well, the only-
which I frankly, I don't understand, and I'd like for them to come and explain why they want the 340B in there.
We're all about 340B, but I also say that that's a subject of big litigation right now between the hospitals and pharma, and that's going to end up going to probably the Supreme Court.
Well, you may want to, this may give you some additional information that would be helpful to you.
So what I would do then, if there's no objection, is work with Ted to get us some information and bring someone, maybe even a couple people here at our next subcommittee meeting to discuss this. Everybody okay with that?
Yeah.
Anything else to be brought before the committee? Well, before we adjourn, what I'll do is submit these motions on behalf of the subcommittee to the full task force, and that way doesn't need a second, it's on behalf of the subcommittee, and we'll do it that way.
That's good at 1 o'clock.
That's today at 1 o'clock, and if there's no objection, I'd like to, the record to reflect that both of those votes were unanimous, so that we can then say unanimous to the committee. No objection? Okay. Motion to adjourn has been made. Second? Second. All in favor, say aye. Thank you all so much for your proposals and time.
We'll